Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Matty B. And holy moly, an unbelievable first round in the NFL draft. We're going to skip right over the top picks, and let's go to the first quarterback off the board, Matt. Kenny Pickett. I know you have to be feeling bad because your boy, Malik Willis, had to wait. Let's start with Pickett. What do you think of that pick in the first round?
I mean, I think it makes sense because when you think back to Steeler draft picks of the past, one of the things that always stood out was that the Rooney family regretted not having not taking Dan Marino in that '83 draft when they had the opportunity and they let him fall. And so by being able to kind of fix that mistake, Marino was 27th overall pick. Pickett goes at 20. So they had the opportunity to pick him. They've obviously had their homework done because he's been in the area. They've worked out at the same facility. They were able to really see him on a consistent basis. And I think overall, with the style that the Pitt Panthers are running, those schemes are going to carry over because Canada was an OC at Pitt. So I'm sure there's some of his playbook type things there that were intertwined as part of his program. Plus, he's more of a pro style situation. I felt bad that Malik fell as far as he did, but I also think at the same time, as a coach, my personal views of what I would do with Malik Willis at quarterback is going to be a lot different than what Mike Tomlin and Matt Canada had planned for him. So, I mean, I think that they were looking for someone to maintain that same pro style approach, heavy run game, play action. I think Pickett fits the bill. What do you think?
I'm still torn on it back and forth. I really like Willis, and I wonder, like, where's he going to fit? And, like, you're right. They always talk about how raw he is, and you're going to have an offense to build around. But the Steelers right now, you have a quarterback room that you can kind of learn how to be a pro. And I think they could have had an opportunity to really push around him. If I look at the roster right now, they're not competing for the Super Bowl this year. And, I mean, truth be told, either were the Bengals whenever they brought in Joe Burrow, and it took him a year. He got hurt, I know. So maybe if Pickett comes in with that kind of swagger, I don't know if he has it. And so that's what I'm wondering. That's what I want to see from him. Is, you're going to have to compete for a job now because they brought in Trubisky. And, Trubisky has to be looking at this like, if I don't get him picked, I'm not even going to be a backup. They're not going to let a first-round guy be the backup forever. It's not like he was a late-round pick that has the low salary. If this doesn't work out, I would assume he's going to be out of the league, right? I mean, the XFL, I don't think they're going to take a guy like that.
Fitzmagic's played for just about every team in the league. So, I mean, I think maybe he just bounces. He could continue to bounce around.
Yeah, but was he a top first-round pick?
He was not.
See, I think they get slotted into the salary. Where, like, if you're a first-round pick, your veteran salary keeps going up. That's why I think Cole Beasley, I don't think he's been picked up anywhere. I think that's why he's still floating around. Because he gets the veteran salary, and you're kind of stuck. That's kind of what Kaepernick's thing is. Teams they want to give him a chance. I mean, there's already been discussions about it. He thinks that the salary's too low. They're giving him like the minimum of whatever the veteran is. I think, wasn't it $14 million or something? And for a guy that's been out of the league that long, even if you give him the minimum, that's still a hell of a lot. I mean, the Steelers got Haskins for like, $1 million or whatever? He's still on his rookie deal.
Yeah.
So, like, Trubisky's still there, too. That next deal he's going to get, I think it goes by how many, like, years you've been in the league, and it's, like, to protect the retirement or whatever. I mean, it's kind of built so that the draft has a bigger importance because you have a better chance of moving on. And then, like, if you're a guy like Chad Henne that gets taken late, I don't think he was near the first round, and then he's good enough but not great, he can play forever. And they just keep giving him that deal. And I think that's why you get guys that are on that stick around forever. Once you make that first big contract, I think it kind of screws your next deal because they don't want to, like, the Players Association doesn't want them to be able to take veterans and give them really low salaries. And that makes sense at a certain point. So, I mean, that same like a guy like Le'Veon Bell, he's not going to get a big time deal. They're not going to give him a long-term deal at like whatever he's going to slot in at. being a vet like that. And that's why I think you see him bouncing around now. So it's going to be very different because I wonder if Pickett, what do you think? Do you think he's going to start this year? At first game of the year, I mean.
I'm going to say no, unless he really blows the doors off during camp. I think he's in a spot where they can give Trubisky that starting gig, and then if he struggles, if the team's struggling, if they're in some kind of downward spiral, they can say, all right, well, let's see where we're at, and hand the keys over.
And so I want to see him not start. That's kind of what I want to see him kind of learn the league. My only thing is, I think they have to go with Rudolph. I mean, Trubisky's kind of there. I would be surprised if he's there in the fall, right? I don't think you carry 3 quarterbacks like that. Normally, one of them always moves. Now, and maybe Rudolph is the guy that gets moved. Right?
Yeah.
Because that makes more sense now that I think about it. Because like Pickett's coming in, he's going to be the leader. So you don't want the guy that's been there for a while taking a helmet to the head in the locker room or whatever. I think maybe Rudolph moves. But that's kind of what I'm looking at. I did bring up the thing is called NFL minimum salaries and veteran cap benefit. So there is like a cap to signing some of those, but it's just a long chart. You can look it up if you want. I'm not going to read it because it's going to be like a certain $500,000 or whatever the cap hits, and whatever their table is, like whatever they're slotted at, that's going to depend on like what salary they're able to get for how many years or whatever. And so it makes negotiations a little bit easier, unless you get a team that's like going crazy and it's like, I'm going to make you the highest paid player. And then that's why you see like wide receivers and they all get pissed because they're like, well, I had better stats than that dude. Why'd you sign him to that? And then everyone wants to be slotted up into that new echelon, and then they keep getting pushed up the salary cap. They're like, well, we got to increase it now because we signed all these poor deals. And so like at some point it has to kind of bottom out, I would think. But who knows? Maybe it doesn't.
But I almost think like when you look at the situation that Pickett's coming into, there are a lot of similarities to what the Pittsburgh Steelers had during Roethlisberger's rookie year in 2004.
They don't have Tommy Gunn. Was he the guy? Who was even the guy?
He was the guy. He got hurt, I believe, in the second week of the season. They played Baltimore, and he got hurt. And then Ben started and just like rattled off.
Well, to be honest,
like 12 or 13 wins right in a row.
I don't remember what I said when he was drafted, but I was hoping that Rudolph could be that gunslinger like Tommy Maddox. And I don't think he would have had his high ceiling, but I had a good feeling like maybe he could be like a lighter Patrick Mahomes, where you're just slinging the ball all over, and that can work for a few years. Steelers might be able to make a Super Bowl run, right? But he never played with that confidence that it seemed like he had. And so again, I think that's one of the things that you need. Like Tommy Maddox had it.
He had it, and I think when you look at like when Mason Rudolph was drafted out of Oklahoma State, they're an air raid team. Like they're a power run, but they were air raid concepts. And I think like with Pittsburgh doing a little bit more different pro style approach, I don't know that fit as well. I thought they were with them going more empty sets and more spread type sets, that it would cater more to his skill set. But it just I don't know if it was just out of convenience that they just kept a lot of those concepts similar, that he just hasn't materialized as well as what he should have.
And that's my main thing. What is going to happen in terms of player development? Did you see that my boy, Devin Bush, they didn't extend his deal? So he's playing for a contract this year. And they kind of said, like, yeah, it was the ACL. Hasn't been the same. I don't think the team made that statement, but that's kind of what's leaked out. And I think everyone was aware of that. But then, like, you have that dude, like, the Lions took that wide receiver from Alabama that had, like, the ACL injury in the championship game, right? So, like, you don't know how a guy's going to recover. If you do lose a step or two, and I think there were reports that he's able to run and didn't lose any speed, I'm hoping Devin Bush can kind of turn it around and say, like, now I'm going to be the guy, even if it's not in Pittsburgh. I think he was a good player, and he has definitely kind of fallen off. I think undersized is more of his issue, the way the Steelers were playing him. But now they have to make that cut. Like, where is the leadership coming from? That's why I go back to Tommy Maddox. Tommy Maddox had it. And I think that Ben Roethlisberger, when he came in, he realized that Tommy Maddox had this confidence, even if he might not have had the best physical attributes. But Ben had to compete with him. Like, does Pickett feel like he looks around the room? Does he feel like he has to compete with those guys? I don't know. Right? I know Trubisky feels like he has to compete because he probably knows this is probably one of his last chances. And, I mean, even Nick Foles, Super Bowl winner, getting cut. Is he even going to get another chance? Like, that's insane to me. That I know, I think he's been around longer, so maybe that's where the veteran stuff comes in contract-wise, but it's like, wow. Because I think the Eagles still made a horrendous mistake letting him go, even though it set him back a few years, but they got the Super Bowl, so who cares? And I thought they did a good job of drafting. That was like, damn, why did the Eagles do good? Because I'm not a fan of the Eagles. So they got Jordan Davis, which Jordan Davis is so big. He would have been perfect on the Steelers D-line. I know they were never going to get him. But when he started to fall, I was like, yeah, that's when you get some of his like effort things where they're like, he's too big. He couldn't play that many plays. He kept having to go on the sideline and take a breather. I'm like, yeah. He's so big, and Georgia had such a good depth on their D-line. I mean, they broke the modern-day record. Did you see that? They always do the record of like how many people got drafted, which is insane because the ESPN poll that we talked about last week had like Cincinnati, Michigan, Notre Dame on it, and they weren't even close to what Georgia had drafted, 15 dudes.
Yeah.
So maybe they knew that Georgia was that high, and they just wanted you to pick like the second rung, which team would have the most come out. But looking at Georgia, I mean, you see the benefits of having all those players come in. It was kind of before NILs, but you kind of know that it's there. But if you can build the best team through paying or whatever, then very easy to win a championship when your whole team gets drafted. That's how LSU did it, remember?
Yeah.
So I just don't know how many of those guys are going to actually pan out, because we can go to the number 1 pick now. Walker. I still don't know what the hell the Jaguars are doing. Right? The entire thing was like a joke to me. I watched some of the recaps. I've never seen a number 1 overall pick kind of get the head scratching like, what? Wasn't there another defensive end a few years ago that kind of washed out of the league that got a similar type of, like, yeah, we knew they were going to pick him, but it kind of like wasn't the best. I'm going to look it up and see if I could find the name. Because I watched the pick, and then the funniest thing to me, Matt, is that they compared his upside to Kwity Paye, another Michigan defensive end. I sent you the screenshot.
Yeah.
It's like they could just take the guy from Michigan. And they were like trying to make excuses to why Jacksonville thought he could be better. And they were like, I don't even know, what did Kwity Paye even get drafted? Was it second round? I don't think he was a number 1 pick. Or first round pick, I mean. But he was another project.
But I think it almost just felt like they could play him at defensive end, they could play him at linebacker, and they weren't quite sure what way they wanted to go defensively, so they took a guy that could give them flexibility.
So I'm looking it up, and Kwity Paye did have a first-round grade. And when did he actually get taken, though? Oh, he was drafted in the first round. I thought it was around like 20. It's 21. So later in the round, but like that's your prediction. It's like you have the talents to be a number 21 pick. Like that's your ceiling. Great job, man. And to me, it was kind of like, all right, well, they were like, well, he has the measurables. And then they put up the combine thing. I sent it to you. The combine, the NFL's own advanced stats, had Hutchinson as a better athlete. So like even their I don't even know what to call it. Like their description of why they picked him didn't make any sense. And I think that's why I confused a lot of the analysts. It's like, yeah, you got this guy, and I hope he does well. Like, I'm not dogging the guy. I'm dogging the process of what the Jaguars did, because you look at the guy, he didn't have the stats. Nowhere close to the stats that Hutchinson had. And then they were like, well, Hutchinson also played with the other one. I can't think of his name now. The other defensive end that got hurt. And they're like, so maybe his stats were a little inflated because of that. And then you watch how many guys get drafted from the Georgia D-line, and it's like, why wasn't he putting up stats again? Like, he had Jordan Davis in the middle. Could you imagine if Michigan's D-line had Jordan Davis on it this past year, Matt? They would have been one of the NFL's greatest of all time. Because, like, that would have been like Ndamukong Suh eating it up, and they couldn't block both him and Hutchinson. What was the guy, Petit Ferrer, the Ohio State tackle? I can't ever pronounce his name. He ended up getting drafted. They had like a whole segment on him. Like, that guy was a first-round pick. They had him, some pre-drafts had him as high as 10. And then during the Ohio State-Michigan game, Hutchinson was pointing at him, telling him to try to stop him, and then he pancaked him. And he fell out of the first round, like, immediately after that game.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't see how you can be like, well, the guy from Georgia, he might be good. And it's like, Hutchinson already dominated a guy that everyone had as possibly one of the top tackles so bad. And even again at the Senior Bowl, he dominated him again and pancaked him. That he fell to the first round, Matt. And by all means, his interview, he sounded like a great kid. So it's like, he was honestly, Hutchinson ruined his salary, basically. You could say that. Because he didn't have any other bad games other than the Michigan game. And I'm looking at Walker, and I'm looking for like, hey, show me some highlights. They didn't really have any highlights for him. So I don't understand why you would waste your first round pick, or your number 1 overall pick, I mean, mind you. Like, if you're not confident, trade down. Trent Baalke, though, I sent you the stats, Matt, because I knew I wasn't crazy. So everyone was like, back in the day when Harbaugh went to Michigan, everyone was dogging him about how Baalke built the team, and he has all the right to push Harbaugh out. And I sent you the list of guys. Baalke didn't draft any of them, other than Kaepernick. He was the only guy that Baalke picked from the core of that Niners team. You think Frank Gore, Patrick Willis, who else did they have there? I mean, they had a ton of dudes that were just around, and Baalke didn't pick any of them. And then even the guy he did pick, Alden Smith, was like arrested and wasn't even playing on the team half the time.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how you got another job, right? They talk about like, hey, the NFL we're really inclusive. There's no way that they couldn't give another GM a chance. Because I did what was the thing? The 49ers, one of their blogs put together how many, like the actual value from Pro Football Reference. The value of all Baalke's drafts was a 36.2. Or no, 362. They didn't divide it. So 362 compared to their in-conference rival, the Seahawks, at a 601. So half of the value of who they were competing against, and behind teams like the Bengals, Matt. Remember how great the Bengals have been lately? Not so great. So, like, if Baalke can't even draft against them, I see them and I'm like, what are they doing? I did read it. So, Scott McLaughlin, I don't know how to say his name. He was the guy that built it, and then he actually went to the Seahawks. So it cracks me up that the 49ers pushed him out, hired Baalke. The Seahawks brought him in and then won a Super Bowl with his draft picks after he had drafted Crabtree, Vernon Davis. Those are the guys I was thinking of. Golson, Joe Staley, Delaney Walker, Patrick Willis. You know, all the 49ers guys that people actually know, other than Kaepernick. So I don't understand it. I don't know how he got another job. And Jaguars fans, if you're looking at that and you're saying, wow, that guy, he's really building a good team. It's like, no. I still don't understand. I feel bad for Hutchinson because he landed with the Lions. If he has a bad career, I mean, it could just be a bad fit. And he would never have pulled an Eli Manning. Remember when Eli Manning got pushed to New York because his daddy said no? Like, crazy. And that's my boy, Eli, Hall of Fame quarterback Eli Manning. What'd you think of that first pick? Because I know I've been talking about it.
I just thought there's a reason that they've been drafting to the top of the. I mean, they've been drafting close to the top every year, so there's something to the fact that they're just not capitalizing on those top draft picks, and when you're constantly flipping general managers and coaches and you can't get those little things right. Like, it's tough to have the consistency within the organization. I mean, you've talked at length about this before, where the teams that are consistently in the running for playoff wins and making the deep runs, they're teams that they have a lot of consistency in their front office. So when you have, I mean, look at Pittsburgh. This was their last draft for Colbert, the GM. He's been there for 20 years. That was his 20th draft. Like, you're gonna know, like, this is where our strengths are, and you're working with Tomlin that, like, these are areas we need to improve on. These are things we don't. And if he's constantly working with a different coach every 2 or 3 years, you're not going to have the same ability to field that type of team.
Looking back, was I thinking of Courtney Brown, the great Penn State defensive end for the Cleveland Browns? But you had the same situation. They picked Tim Couch the year before, and then they picked Courtney Brown, and both guys end up being busts. And I've seen people talk about Trevor Lawrence, about how he's going to be a sure thing. But is he a sure thing? Wouldn't it be really weird if the Jaguars followed that same path as that Browns team, and then they just end up never picking up?
Well, that's why I always laugh at when the draft experts say, "Oh, well, they lost that draft. They gave up way too many picks." Just because you have 10, 15 draft picks doesn't necessarily mean that equates to a Super Bowl contender. Because, like, everyone highlights what Jimmy Johnson did with the Dallas Cowboys when he made the Herschel Walker trade, and he got like a slew of picks to Minnesota for trading away Herschel Walker. It was like, the only reason that's even mentioned is because they drafted, like, 5 Hall of Famers, 6 Hall of Famers, like, out of those next couple drafts that laid the foundation for that next Dallas dynasty in the 90s. So like,
I agree. I don't know why. I mean, you got to build around, like, the best players, I would think. Not the guys with the best upside, right? At some point, you got to get some dudes out there. Like, that same draft with Courtney Brown, the number 2 pick was LeVar Arrington from Penn State, a Pro Bowler. Not like a Hall of Fame type dude, but I would assume much better. The only other guy taken in that draft that's in the Hall of Fame right now is Urlacher. And he went 9th, of course, to the Bears.
Yep.
So you don't know, but you would at least hope that if you get the number 1 pick, you're getting a couple of Pro Bowls out of it. I mean, him and Tim Couch are the only ones, other than Jamarcus Russell, that have been taken number 1 that don't have a Pro Bowl. Although, oh yeah, I guess what was the other guy? Manziel. I guess he wasn't taken number 1. I don't see him on this list. Was it Eric Fisher that year, or Clowney?
It might have been Clowney.
But even then, it's like, you're going back how many years? Oh, I do see a trend here because Kajana Carter. I'm seeing all these Penn State guys, Matt, that get taken number 1 and never do anything. Wasn't he the one that was, like, selling suits or whatever? He got like a free suit. No, that was the other guy, wasn't it? They had all kind of weird issues there. But
Kajana had an ACL issue in Cincy.
Yeah. And that's a bummer, too, because you never know. That's like why you get some teams drafting. One of the 49ers reports said that Balky constantly kept drafting dudes that had ACL injuries, saying that the surgery is much better now and you can get them at a lower value. Like, that's how you're building your team, a bunch of injured guys. That not because of talent, Matt, because he thought that he can get them lower because they were injured. And I'm like, that's just a weird take, right? So, I don't know. I still think that overall, That was a surprise. What was the other one? The Texans reached for that injured guy from LSU that hasn't kind of been the same. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, going through, who do you think had the best draft?
A little bit biased, but I'm going to go with the Jets.
Why are you biased? You a Jets fan now?
No, Jermaine Johnson. I told you after he was drafted that I didn't want to jinx him because there were some projections saying that he was going to go early, and I didn't want to sound like an idiot. Go, oh yeah, he's going to go, because I know like he wasn't going to get the hype that a lot of the other players were because of how bad Florida State's been the last couple of years. But I mean, when you watch his tape, he single-handedly beat Miami, and I think that he has the physical presence because he's bounced around from bigger programs to JUCOs to Florida State, and now I think he's seen enough in those bigger games to be able to contribute for the Jets. So I think they get him and they pick up Sauce Gardner. That's going to solidify their defense more. I think that helps them. Plus picking up, I mean, I don't know how high you had Garrett Wilson, but a lot of people had him as the top receiver.
And that was another one where I think it could have gone either way. I think he had more talent. He wasn't as polished as some of the other guys, but does that really matter? You know, it's kind of who's going to take you to the next step. Like, they always talked about how on that receiving core, Olave ran the best routes. Who else ran the best routes, didn't have the best talent? Jerry Rice, right? But not everyone's a Jerry Rice. You can run the best routes and not ever be able to put it together. So maybe you can learn how to run good routes, you know? So I think receivers are a little bit more of a crapshoot. I did think it was kind of strange that after he was taken, that kind of seemed the direction that the Saints went. They're like, hey, we're going to get Olave, and we're just going to go ahead and start a run of receivers because then the Lions got Williams that I had talked about coming back from the injury. So it's like really screwed some of the other teams later on, like the Packers, that I think were just waiting for a wide receiver, and then they're just like, you know, we're not going to get that guy. We're going to go and just draft defense, which I thought was a good move because, like, hey, you signed Aaron Rodgers. Everyone talks about how Aaron Rodgers isn't happy, doesn't have anyone to throw to. In the playoffs, he doesn't put up. You have to rely on defense. Like, the special teams lost them the game against the 49ers this past year. They made some coaching changes there. So maybe you don't need weapons.
I don't even know that it would have mattered at that point because the defense was just bleeding points left and right. So even if you got them 2 or 3 playmakers, so you lose 58-56.
Yeah, so
you scored a pile of points, but you couldn't stop them at all, and it still ended up losing. You're no further ahead.
Plus, he's threatening to leave. It's kind of like what the Steelers did when Ben Roethlisberger was kind of in and out. Build around the defense, and then watch the quarterback lose down the stretch, and be like, "What are we doing for you again?" Like, Ben had the weapons, and then they all kept leaving, and he was still putting up numbers. But then it's like, why are you throwing so many picks, dude? Take care of the ball, and then we don't lose. The one that stood out to me was Dotson from Penn State. I know I just talked about how all those Penn State busts were there, but I really think he might be the most explosive out of this group. And maybe I'm wrong. I know some of them have put up ridiculous numbers, but just in terms of like the ball in his hands, he's been able to make a ton of moves. And so that's what I wonder if he might have the most impact. But again, he lands with Washington, and it's like, all right, I have zero faith in Washington, so he'll probably end up being a bust too. I don't know why Drake London from USC was a top guy off the draft. To be honest, I think the Ohio State wide receivers are better. But that's just personally me.
That when I saw that pick, like I just shook my head. I'm like, oh, so we're going back down this road again.
I know, you're Falcons. You just buy a Jet shirt, Matt. Just make that change. You don't want to cheer for the Falcons. How can you cheer for them? Their offense is a mess, man. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I don't have Julio on my fantasy team anymore. Matt Ryan isn't there. Like, Shanahan isn't calling plays, so they're not going to be going to the Super Bowl.
Well, didn't the Titans then they traded A.J. Brown and drafted Burks from Arkansas.
Which I thought was a good. I did think that was a good pick, but at the same time, I don't understand why they felt the need, because afterwards Brown came out and said, like, for what he ended up signing for, like after they traded him, was like, I would have signed for, like, I think he signed for $20 million. He's like, I probably would have just re-signed with Tennessee for 22.
Well, yeah, that's what's crazy. They also got Willis, the quarterback, and they were the ones that drafted Petit Ferrier from Ohio State too.
And I did like the fact that they're real quick to ask Tannehill if he's going to mentor Willis, and he's like, "It's not my job."
Did they say that?
Yes, they, like, everyone always feels like as soon as you draft a quarterback, like, they'll be asking Trubisky, "Hey, are you going to mentor? Are you going to mentor Pickett?" And then you have the choice. You can be a dick and just be like, "Nah, that ain't me."
His response could be, "I don't even know if I'm going to be on the team." It's just like when the Ohio State AD was asked about Jim Tressel or whatever, and he's like, "I'm afraid he's going to fire me." Like, you know, who's in charge, not you. You're just happy to be there. I'm just happy to be here. I don't know what's going on. So, I mean, I do think the Jets had a good draft, but like you said, yeah, great draft on paper. How are they going to get coached up? Is any of it going to matter if they're all busts? And we don't know. I mean, looking back through, because I do think it's funny, like clicking back through the drafts, how many guys were actually Pro Bowlers. Even last year, only 6 of the top first-round picks were Pro Bowlers. Pittsburgh had one with Najee Harris. He was the lowest. And they were all first-round guys. So it takes a while for those like later-round guys like Willis anyway to make an impact. And so I don't think Tannehill should be threatened at all. But that's kind of where you're looking at. I mean, even a guy like Joe Burrow hasn't made a Pro Bowl, according to this, and he's been pretty high up there. So quarterbacks, it's even harder to break into that mold. I think it takes a couple years, although Herbert from that same draft has made one. They're on the same side, too. The AFC, so we'll see. I don't think, was there anything that really stood out to you in terms of the draft?
It just seemed like the general impression, the teams that typically make sound choices did well. Like, you saw the Ravens drafting Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame, like, good safety. They picked up Linderbaum that I thought could have been a potential pick for Pittsburgh. Like, they pick up a good center. But I thought Pittsburgh's draft with Pickett has the potential to be solid. I mean, I thought that they followed up the Pickett pick well by going and getting another crazy wide receiver. Because I thought, you know, looking at some of those other guys that you talked about, the name that kept floating around was Pickens from Georgia.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, you watch him and he's so physical and getting into fights with the defensive backs in their rivalry game. Like, you want to see, like, a level of physicality like that they haven't had since Hines Ward left. I know that sounds cliche, but it's going to go one of two ways with him. Like, he's either going to be, like, even better than Hines Ward, or he's going to get Alden Brown by week 3. Like, there's nothing in between. Like, I think that boom or bust is so great. But I mean, when you look at some of those other receivers they have, I've been seeing a lot of stuff like hyping up like Washington and Johnson. It's like, just catch the ball. Like, if Pickens comes in and does nothing more, I don't care if he makes rap albums, I don't care if whatever side things he has, if on Sundays he's catching the ball, that's all I want him to do. Like, the Pittsburgh receivers have just struggled with just doing the primary role that they have. And if he can catch jump balls, they're going to be just fine, because let's face it, they have Najee Harris. He's going to run the ball 75 times a game. So when they throw that one play action, if he can go make a jump, if he can increase the odds of a completion, Pittsburgh will be fine.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they have Claypool, which is another big receiver. So is that the direction they're going, trying to build up a more physical Tennessee-style offense where they have the big receivers on the outside and that can open up lanes for Harris? Because if not, if they keep feeding him as much as he is, he's only going to last for 5 years tops. I mean, 3, most likely, but I'd say 5 years tops. So,
but I think like the frustrating thing with Claypool is that when you look size for size, he's every bit as built as Jamar Chase from the Bengals. But Chase was just so much more explosive, getting off the ball, getting separation, getting downfield, where it just felt like Claypool would just get himself tied up and couldn't get off the defensive backs and get separation to make a lot of those plays. It's like maybe having Pickens there, if they actually have a true receiving threat, maybe it takes some of that pressure off them and they can open some things up.
Yeah, because they couldn't open it up with anyone else on the team because they dropped the ball. I mean, that's really where they're at, and I'm glad Juju's gone. So that'll be one where we see how far does it actually go in terms of putting the ball up there. Another team that we talked about in terms of quarterbacks, like movement inside like the AFC North with Baker Mayfield, the Panthers end up getting Matt Corral, right?
That was one that I thought was a good pick.
They got him so late, and I'm like, yeah, why would you not even care? They even said like, hey, we're not looking for a quarterback anymore. And I like that had to benefit them, the fact that quarterbacks were just not even going. Like they were just still there. The Falcons got Ritter, and I almost wondered like, well, I don't even know, is Ritter that much better than Corral? I don't know. To me, like that seemed like that could go either way. And so I can't wait to see them two battle it out in the NFC South, assuming they both win the starting job. Because I don't think that they're up against much, right?
But I think when you look at the teams that have had quarterbacks drafted early and have had early success, the thing that they've had is, number one, they've had good defenses to bail them out of trouble. And secondly, they haven't been asked to do a lot of things. So I think like that, you get that early. And I know you've kind of pointed out, well, maybe it's because the defenses haven't had a chance to game plan around what the quarterbacks can and can't do. But I think it's also the offensive coordinators, when they have a young quarterback, you're not going to throw maybe as much plays and verbiage and different things that are going to maybe trip some quarterbacks up. I think with the younger guys, you're like, we need to keep this simple. You stick to some basic concepts with a little bit of window dressing. And I think in a lot of cases, the more that you're able to take one play and present it in a bunch of different ways, it makes it more complicated, but it makes it easy for the quarterback. And I think like you have Burrow right now that was having success. When Roethlisberger was drafted, he had success. Hell, you really want to go back 30 years when Brady was in the league. And when he first came in for Bledsoe, they had a strong defense. He didn't have to carry the team on his back. You know, when you look at like what the Jets have done with Sanchez and you know, go down through the list, Pennington and all those guys, they were coming in and immediately they had to carry the team on their shoulders. You know, Ryan Leaf with San Diego, they're coming in and immediately having to carry the team. Well, you don't have a defense, you don't have a running game, you don't have a receiver. Like, you're going to struggle. And do you get a Derek or a David Carr where you're drafted by Houston, you get sacked 75 times, and now it stunts your growth because you're so shell shocked that you're not able to stay in the pocket and make the throws that you need to make.
Well, you brought up Chase. I mean, that's why Burrow has a guy that when he's in trouble, he can throw the ball up too. Roethlisberger had Plexico Burress, and he had Hines Ward as an outlet. Like, right? He had a lot of weapons. And so Brady didn't really have that many weapons. People, they couldn't even name the receivers that were on that team. If you look back, they'll be like, oh, yeah, he had Randy Moss, didn't he? It's like, yeah, that 1 year. So, like, he had to dink and dunk the ball. And that's where I think, depending on the situation, like Matt Rule's there with Carolina, he's a good offensive coach. Is he going to be able to put that together and make it easy and digestible for him? Because it seemed like he was able to get Cam Newton in good spots, and whenever he was kind of fitting in like right back, he was good. And then as soon as like the defense was like, hey, we remember this guy, we know how to shut him down, he was in trouble right after that. Same with Sam Darnold. It's like, get him a guy that has confidence, and then you're relying on the coach, and that's kind of where these other teams land. Like, is Pittsburgh going to be able to let him go? Maybe that's why they went with Pickens. Are they gonna be able to get the ball downfield, or is he just going to rely on like handing it off? Handing it off, you got a guy that can catch out of the backfield. I want to see really how the offense evolves. Because if they go back into like, hey, you're going to go back and just freelance it like Ben was running, we're going to have nightmares. And you can't do limited like you did with Rudolph. That's the one thing that I didn't really understand. You could tell that the offense was limited under him. I don't know if it was because of them telling him like, hey, we're going to run the exact plays that we called and you're not allowed to audible or anything. Or it's just like he didn't get it. I don't know. Like, you almost have to wait and see if a quarterback goes somewhere else if that kind of happens. Because I wonder if that happened with Nick Foles where and now he's with the Pedersen or whatever. He's with the Jags anyway. So, like, you get him in. Maybe he was the one calling all those plays with Foles, and he's just out there making the plays. That's kind of what you need. That's also why I was hesitant on, like, the Drew Brees news. Like, I think Drew Brees is kind of doing a lot of that on his own, let alone Sean Payton telling him exactly where to throw the ball to, you know? So you kind of find that mix of what works. But,
and I think you have to also, like, from the coaching standpoint, you have to find what the quarterback's comfortable throwing, because, you know, what Sean Payton's seeing on the film and saying, well, when I call this is going to be open. But if Breeze isn't comfortable making that throw, you know, then it can be the best play call. If it's not executed properly, you're not gaining any ground. And I think when you look at like how Roll was able to game plan some stuff around what's his face? I can't think of his name now.
Sam Darnold?
For Darnold. Like, I think there were some glimmers there before everybody on their team, on Carolina's team, got hurt. So
got hurt or just decided not to play, like McCaffrey.
Fair enough.
Because that one play, he literally just like skipped off the field. Like, oh yeah, I pulled my hammy. I guess I'm done for the rest of the year. Good thing I have time to do some commercials.
But I think Corral's in that similar situation where he can sit back, learn the playbook, and there isn't a lot of pressure, because if things go sideways and Darnold's plays terribly, they say, well, look at how bad we are. We wanted to just give the rookie some reps. I mean, we're already 0-5, 0-6. Like, no harm, no foul. Same deal with Trubisky. If he comes out and he plays well, then great. You can have Pickett sit and say he's learning the offense, and we're going to ease him in later on. Versus they come out the gate really stale and lose a couple games, which I don't think is going to happen. But in that event that it does, you can roll him out slowly and say, hey, we're hurting right now. We just want to get him out there and see what he can do. And if he plays terrible, then you say, well, look at who else we had. It didn't work well for anyone else, and it takes that pressure off.
Yeah, that's why I want to see some of the offenses, because if you're going to keep getting guys that play like that college spread type air raid or whatever they're coming from, are they going to actually turn the keys over? Or are we going to keep getting quarterbacks forced into, hey, this other offense? Like, I wonder how many other Kingsburys are going to be brought into the league. Like, guys like Lincoln Riley, would they have given him a chance to bring his offense to the NFL? Probably not. But they got Kingsbury, and he's been doing fairly well so far. If Murray leaves, like, are they going to let him bring in his own guy again? Like, this is the type of quarterback I need. Let's see if we make plays. Which also reminds me, what do you think of Hopkins taking? Was it Beaver stuff? That's going to take over my deer antler spray now.
Beaver tranquilizer.
And he's like, yeah, I don't know where I got that. Yeah, I wouldn't know where you get that either.
Well, I was thinking about it, and it almost makes perfect sense. He's already one of the best wide receivers in the league, and you make him wait the first 6 weeks. So he still just comes back when everyone else is banged up and he's healthy and he's in the mix. He's ready to go because he was starting to fade towards the end of last year and getting hurt. So the plan is coming together.
I said that was the plan with Roethlisberger. Didn't really pan out. Tom Brady did it that one year.
Yeah, it worked out well for him.
It worked out well for Garoppolo too. He's like, "Thanks, buddy." I think that was the quarterback, wasn't it, or was it someone else? Didn't they have Corral or who's the guy they had? They had another USC guy. I can't remember his name now. But I don't know. Like, what are you going to do at that point? I don't understand how you would even have that in your system. And then even if you were taking a supplement, it's like, why is this being compared to beaver tranquilizer anyway? Because he said it was like a high grade, wasn't it? Or was it low grade? I think it was high grade. And it's kind of like the deer antler spray. It's like, why?
Three separate types of steroids in a low grade beaver tranquilizer.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you had to kind of know. Like my man Barry Bonds, they're like, yeah, you took something, we don't know what, and we'd never be able to find on the test. And it's like, well, maybe I didn't take anything. It's like, you've taken 3 different things in a beaver tranquilizer? He's like, I don't know what any of that is. So for all those people out there, let's just say Barry Bonds never tested positive that we've seen, and it never anything like this in a weird beaver trank. If he was out there doing beaver tranks or deer antler spray, if that's what Barry Bonds was on, I'd apologize to everyone on the show. I just have one show where I just talk about how sorry I am for misleading about Barry Bonds, but I'm still waiting to see that information, right? It'll never come out. It's like the FBI investigation in all those basketball schools where I looked back because I talked about Jay Wright, this is off topic, and how he was in like the investigation or whatever for the cell phone cards. It seemed like that was like the scam that Villanova had been running. So I tried to find that article because I'm like, when did that happen? 2003, I believe. So it was like when he first came into the league, their team was garbage. And he was still doing like the weird scam to get people to sign there. And then the FBI investigation, Villanova, no one ever talks about them being in there, but they just miraculously signed the guy that the FBI is investigating, Matt. Like no big deal. You know how your team just always signs that guy? Like how Duke just got, what's the guy, Zion? They're like, yeah, no big deal. He got that big money from Kansas. He didn't need that, though. Right? Because he knew Duke was much better. Playing for Coach K. It's like, no, they probably got offered more money there. Like, where's the rest of this ledger? Like, why did you just leak out some teams? And so I'm just like, I was baffled by it. So why cheat? Why take the roids? That's what I'm getting at. If you want to cheat, they talk about like the Olympics. It's like, we'll just make it all legal. Like, do whatever steroids you can. Yeah, but then you're going to have like these weird freaks out there. It's like if they're already doing it. Because like, isn't that the biggest scam? Like that it could have been linked now? Because I think that I read a report where Lance Armstrong's testicular cancer might have been caused by his steroids. And they used to put out all that scary stuff about how you might get it from riding bikes. It's like, how many men didn't ride bikes because they were afraid of getting testicular cancer when it might have just been him doing steroids? Right? It's like,
fair enough.
So if you're going to put it out there, at least be honest with us, man. Like, because I would think using beaver tranks is a bad move, right? It has to be bad for your career. Although, I mean, deer antler stuff. I mean, Ray Lewis came back really fast from that bicep tear. I mean, weren't you struggling from a tear or something? For years. You need to get the spray. Beaver tranks where it's at, Matt. They have beavers around you.
Beavers.
If you come back and you're like doing push-ups in front of me, next time I see you, I'll be like, what the hell, were you beaver trapping? I'd never even know. That's why people are like, yeah. Remember all those guys that are doing steroids? Shame on those baseball guys. Meanwhile, Ray Lewis like on TV every week. It's like, why is he on here? He did the same exact thing, and he was suspended, wasn't he? Maybe he wasn't. I get how his suspension's mixed up. I'm gonna look it up. Maybe they have a list. Anything else you have on the NFL draft while we're on it?
No. I'm trying to think.
So he was suspended for. He was fined. He was on probation. They should just have a Wikipedia section for suspension so that I know. I think that one was from the murder trial. He was the one. He jumped in front of Trent Dilfer and said, "I'm going to Disney World." That's part of his Wikipedia. Trent Dilfer. That's a callback to last week. Whenever they're talking about how they should have took him over or instead of Harbaugh. Yeah, crazy. I guess it doesn't really say on here. It just says he has a lot of charitable activities. During the same offseason bat, he was suspended in 2006, but yet he also won the offseason award in 2006 for Act of Kindness Award for his work in the community. You can't make it up. You can't make it up, Matt. It's like, hey, ignore that other investigation we have going on. This is a charitable man. Those weren't court-ordered charities that he was working for. Let's see. The only other thing I have on here for this week, because I knew the NFL draft would be our big thing, the television contract negotiations are in for the Big Ten. And CBS put this out, which I'm kind of surprised, because normally you hear rumblings or whatever. So the Big Ten expects to have an agreement in place soon, in about a month, they said, which would begin next year. So the SEC, before they added Oklahoma and Texas, they signed a deal that was giving them $300 million a year as a conference, for putting their games on ESPN. They're not going to be on CBS anymore, which I thought was a dumb move, right? CBS has been shilling for you for how many years? I hear the stupid CBS song, I think SEC football. And so they're like, you know what? ESPN's been helping us a lot. We're going to go strictly with them, which is going to hurt their visibility. I'm already going to say it, because you're going to lose the CBS game. ABC might, do the 3:30 game instead? But they're still going to put a game up from the Big Ten. They always do. They're not going to stop showing Purdue versus Indiana to show Ole Miss versus whatever. They're just not. Vanderbilt, Ole Miss is not going to outdraw Purdue, Indiana. So the Big Ten said, hey, we're going to go do our thing and let every conference come in. CBS doesn't know who's in the bidding, but I'm sure they're involved, and they said that right now it's closing in on $1 billion per season. So they're going to make, per school, I sent you the math because I wanted to do it so I didn't sound like an idiot, $71.4 million a school just for the Big Ten network and their television deal, which is insane, Matt. That's almost double what the ACC and the Big 12 make with everything, the college football playoffs and all of that put together. So for all the people making fun of Rutgers, saying that was a bum deal, not so fast, my friend. Because everyone talking about how cord cutters are going to ruin college football. They're going to take all the money away. All these conferences are going to die. Hasn't happened. And this is going to be a gigantic deal. They said that altogether, everything with the SEC, with their playoffs and everything, right now, theirs is close to $1 billion. And probably going to be over $1 billion once they negotiate in Oklahoma and Texas. Which is an if, because you don't know. ESPN already owns Texas, that Longhorn station. So maybe they don't give them that much of a bump. The Big Ten could be making more from just one slice of the pie than the entire SEC. So, crazy. I don't know how you expect. What do you think, in terms of paying players? Doesn't that just create an imbalance that's going to be hard for those other conferences to overcome?
I think as the current NILs are, I think you're going to see maybe 6 or 7 schools that are just going to outspend and outpace everyone, and those are going to be your now new, just quote, new blue blood type programs, because they're going to have the funding to be able just to go out and pay for whatever player they want, and the NILs are going to be so lucrative that you're going to be crazy as a top prospect not to take those. I mean, you look at what's happening. Thinking of the Addison move with Pitt, where he wasn't even in the portal, but said, yeah, now I'm going to be transferring to USC, and they're saying he could be potentially making as much money at USC this year that Kenny Pickett's going to make going to the league.
Well, see, that's going to be the one thing that the NCAA, for as neutered as it is right now, it looks like that I saw, because I had that ready to bring up, that Pitt has asked the NCAA to look into the Addison deal to see if there was tampering, because that's going to be another key thing that like the NBA always has, and like even the NFL, like you can't form a super team by saying like, hey, you should trade for us or whatever, because that's like part of the tampering deal or whatever. If the NCAA starts to enforce something like that, would he be ruled ineligible? And then would he just come back to Pitt? Because I don't think he actually transferred yet. And I had someone come after me. It was like, because I always talk about like how these schools can go ahead and get like the car dealership deals. They already get the car dealership deals. It's not about small time car dealerships. The car dealerships are basically like a money laundering thing that's already happening. Same with churches. So I don't understand why you don't understand that. Because they already do the car dealership. They get the free car. Hell, Quinn Ewers, he didn't even play at Ohio State. He had the car. And he had to do the commercial to come in and do the car. So the car dealerships are still going to be the same thing where they're able to give the kids extra cash, extra assets. Like, hey, you can have this new car. I'm going to give you money. You're going to do a car dealership deal or commercial. There's not really a commercial. That's just how they're funneling the money into them. Like, it's very simple to understand. So it's easier whenever you have a business like that where you can say, like, hey, this is going to be a write-off for me as a billionaire. It's not going to be like, hey, the guy from Google is a Michigan alum. He's just going to decide to write a check to Hunter Dickinson to come back. And I saw Hunter Dickinson, like, bitching about it. Like, hey, Michigan's only doing, like, they're really hurting their team because they're not just getting cash offers. It's like, it's not pay for play yet. So, like, you're right, Matt. Whoever can get the biggest business deals like Miami has, where, like, your whole entire team's getting paid, paying for one wide receiver isn't going to help your team. It's not going to help your team. I don't know what Lincoln Riley's going to do, bringing all these guys into USC. How are you going to make sure that everyone gets minutes? How are you going to keep everyone happy? Because it's only going to help you to a certain point. You might be able to get a team like Georgia. Georgia's been stacking their team for what, 8 years now, Matt? They have one championship. Like, same with Ohio State. Ohio State is so much more talent than the Big Ten. They don't even go undefeated in the Big Ten most years. So it's like, well, what the hell are you doing?
But I think if you use, like, just those three schools, Ohio State, Georgia, and Southern Cal.
Well, Alabama is the one that's been doing it. And they don't go undefeated, and they don't win the national championship every year.
Well, and I look at Alabama. Alabama's a completely different animal because I feel like Saban has been so smart in terms of getting ahead of some of these different trends.
He's one of the most outspoken ones against paying players, so you know that he's paying players. You don't. Same with Dabo Swinney. You don't speak against it if it's not hurting you, right?
Well, right, but I mean, you look at how hard he was railing against Malzahn's offense at Auburn, saying linemen are downfield.
How unfair it is, yeah.
And then he pulls in Lane Kiffin, does the same thing, and just absolutely murders people. It's like the same deal. Like they're setting what the bar is in terms of paying players. Alabama's going to pay whatever it takes to stay on top. So now that you're saying, all right, well, you're allowed doing this legally, and he gets a grip on what the legalities are of it. It's only a matter of time. I mean, just like with what you're seeing with A&M. A&M's a couple steps behind where Georgia is. I mean, Georgia has had the infrastructure in place now for a while, so it seems, because of how well they were recruiting. I mean, you don't keep nailing top classes and not winning the Natty and maintain that energy.
That's why I see the same thing with, like, I brought up Hunter Dickinson complaining about Michigan basketball. It's like they've finally started to recruit top classes. They never did under Beeline. Beeline never wanted to recruit like that. He's even flat out said, like, yeah, I'm not into that. You know, basically meaning like the money deals that everyone else is doing. And once it's opened up, guess what? Michigan's landing top classes. You can't tell me that for all the money that some of these basketball schools make, they're not getting $1 billion their conference a year. So like basketball is going to be the sport that I think is going to be impacted the most. Where those teams from the ACC, Duke and UNC, yeah, you can keep getting those like anonymous donations or whatever from boosters. But if the Big Ten's like, hey, we really need to make 16 because scheduling's a bitch, and we want to expand with basketball for like whatever television network they sign with, and we want you two to come, they're going to come. Like, their administrators are not going to sit there and say, like, oh, yeah, it's really dumb of us. Because, like, at some point, it might only be 2 conferences. And if you say no to one of them, you might never get in that other one. That's why, like, Nebraska, everyone's like, well, Big Ten should never have invited Nebraska. It's like, Nebraska never would have said no. They probably were afraid that the SEC was never going to invite them. And it's not like the Pac-12 was going to invite them. And so, like, what else? That's why, like, if the Big Ten called the USC and said, hey, we want you guys in Stanford to come to the Big Ten. And they're like, well, we already make $20 million a year in the Pac-12. Travel's going to cost more. They're like, we're giving you $50 million more a year. I think that can offset the travel, right? It's not costing you $50 million to travel to like however many games there is a year. So at some point, you can keep paying players, but like you said, I think you're going to see a narrow. I think it's going to get crazy for the next like 5 or 6 years. So if you're a fan of a team that's small, you might as well just check out. Don't watch. Like Pitt, no offense, unless you're just going for ACC champs, you might as well not watch like the playoffs or anything, because you got to hope that they expand playoffs. I think that's the only way it's going to balance it out. Because like if Pitt made the playoffs last year, Addison might be able to make a better deal at Pitt, because like USC didn't make it. They wouldn't have done anything. New coach, maybe they have a deal for him. But at some point, if you're showing like, hey, we're putting guys in the draft, we're doing this, I think you're going to have a much better chance in a few years when everything settles down. Because at some point, some of these schools are going to keep paying and paying and paying, like Georgia. But if Georgia had never paid off, at some point, they're going to fire that coach, and the whole thing's going to fall apart. And then they're going to be back to square one. So yeah. I want to see what happens. It's crazy to me that it got this high already. Like, they were talking about, and I said make maybe 80 million a team total. I think they're going to crush that, because I think what do they get from the playoffs? It's like 5 or 10 already per school. So they're already over that. And if the SEC gets that, like if ESPN decides to match that for their schools, what the Big Ten gets, I don't see how those other conferences survive. I just don't. Like in terms of football, like you can't compete with that. Like Rutgers will be better than like whatever the Big 12's putting out there. And if they play, like Maryland already was crushing Texas, Matt. Like that's not by surprise. Maryland had the money. Like that's Maryland. No one brought that up like anymore, because they're like, well, Texas is back. Texas has all these recruits coming in. But Maryland has to compete with Ohio State, otherwise they're going to get throttled, and they were getting throttled anyway. So you can't tell me like the money's having no impact, because it is having an impact. But I'm dying. I don't have anything else. Yeah, what do you have for the final bell?
I got nothing.
I mean, draft one I thought pretty good. I liked how there was a lot of movement this year. A lot of crazy picks for us to talk about. Well, maybe we'll do a little bit more analyzing next week as we get into it. Start to talk about NHL, NBA playoffs. I went to the Hurricanes game. I missed the first round of the draft anyway. And they're looking good. They killed Boston game 1. So I'm hoping that they can go on a run here with some good hockey down here in the South, Matt. So I'll be watching that. I know they might match up against the Penguins. So that'll be a good series. I remember last time that happened. So check back next week. And thanks for listening.